Hello, hello, hello. Talking with my hands. So the following is going to be about the mounts. And I took a compilation of my TikTok videos. And the first video that you are finding here, because I didn't do the classes last week, um, is Jupiter, Saturn, and Apollo. So stay tuned after this video. I will do the next three, which will be Mercury, the whole area of Mars, which is the center of your palm, and the moon. So be looking for that video after this one. So without further ado, here are Jupiter, Saturn, and Apollo. Hi. Today we are going to discuss the mount of Jupiter. But before we get into this lesson, I think we need to establish our big three. Now, astrology has their big three, palmistry does too. So take a look at your hand. The mounts are underneath the fingers, like this. I would suggest screenshotting this picture right here so that you can zoom in and identify where these mounts are in your hand. And when we identify what the largest mounts in our hand, we're only going to look at the mounts in our hands compared to what's in our hand. Now, my hand doesn't look like the mounts are very fleshy at all. So I can only compare my mounts compared to the other mounts in my hand. So I wouldn't look at someone else's hand, say they have a big hand or their mounts are large. I can only compare to my other mounts. And I'm also looking for whether the hand is squishy or firm or flat. See, my hand has, it's kind of flat, but there are elevated mounts. And once you have established your big three, you're going to have larger mounts regardless. Like I have more than three if I'm comparing all the mounts in my hand, like Jupiter, Mercury, my moon, Venus, Neptune, actually even inner Mars. These are all the largest mounts in my hand compared to the other mounts. And the plane of Mars is usually always going to be small, or should I say flatter than the other mounts. So do not be concerned because that is actually normal and good. So establish your big three, or just write down which mounts are the largest in your hand. And this series is only going to cover one mount at a time. So let's get into Jupiter. Okay, so Jupiter is the mount underneath the index finger. And at this point, we will have established whether it is one of your large mounts, if it is smaller than the rest of your mounts, if it is squishy, if it is firm, or if it is just flat. Now, Jupiter is where we find qualities such as wisdom, power, leadership, and authority. Also, it's where we find our identity. So our ego is very much represented here. A person with a well-balanced Jupiter is going to exhibit a lot of self-respect. They're not going to do things that they would consider beneath themselves. A person with a well-balanced and well-proportioned Jupiter are going to come off as very kind and diplomatic and maybe a philosopher. You know, this is a person that is very invested in teaching even. If your Jupiter mount is exaggerated, then again, like I said, you can find the ego here. The ego is represented, and the ego protects our identity. So if it is exaggerated, these people might seem egotistical, but they also might seem defensive because this person is defending their identity, or they feel like they have to defend themselves all the time. Like This is who I am, and you better believe it. If it is flatter, then this person doesn't really put a lot of emphasis on these qualities. This person might even struggle with self-esteem issues. This is where we will also consider whether it is fleshy or firm. So fleshy in general, when the hand is fleshier, like the whole hand is going to be considered fleshy. And these people are physically might tend to be a little bit more relaxed. I don't really want to say lazy, but this again is just for you and your own self-assessment. And we have to be truthful with ourselves when we are self-analyzing. I think that, again, a little bit more squishier just says that you're more relaxed, and the motivation to be all of these qualities are going to, you might be lacking in that motivation. Also, though, if it is fleshy and exaggerated, like if that is one of the largest mounts, that means that you do have all of these qualities, but you might come off again as almost, your personality is going to be exaggerated, but you might seem superficial. Now, if it is firm, that puts you in the fixed category. So it means you're stubborn, and these qualities are extremely important to you. So you work hard at these qualities. Now, a person that, again, has a flat or the mount itself is extremely smaller compared to the rest of the mounts in your hand, then all of these characteristics and qualities that I have talked about might be considered blind spots. You're going to struggle with these. Now, the dominant, like if it's exaggerated, it exactly what it says. You're going to overemphasize these characteristics in your personality. So you might be domineering. You might be, again, egotistical. You might be even considered a bully to your peers. So that's it in a nutshell. We will learn after the mounts what the little lines and stuff that you see on these mounts mean, because they will either take away or add to the qualities that you are finding here. And all right, we are back to talk about the mount of Saturn. Now, taking into consideration again all the things that we previously discussed about the size and shape of the mount is going to be relevant to the qualities that I am discussing right now. And that is, it is said that Saturn indicates seriousness, prudence, and a love of solitude. A fully developed mount of Saturn can indicate that a person is fortunate and may rise to a high position through perseverance. Like if you take a look right here, if you look at my Saturn, it looks like the mount is almost in between Apollo and Saturn. And actually, Apollo is closer towards Mercury. So you will notice that there's almost a divot between Jupiter and Saturn. That is actually normal because Apollo looks like it has two mounts, but that is not the case. It's just that Saturn is going to sit more almost in between your middle finger and your ring finger. So that's actually the mount of Saturn that you see right there. And my Jupiter kind of crowds my Saturn, which means that when we discussed about Jupiter, that has everything to do with your ego, your ambition, your leadership skills. So when you have one mount crowding another, it is almost like being a pushy mount. It's saying all of my ambitions are kind of pushing into that what you would consider Saturn. So like if Saturn is where we school ourselves, it is where we find our philosophy. it is our seriousness. It's sometimes that box that we put ourselves into. Well, then it is definitely being shadowed by my own ambition. So take a look at your Saturn. If it is smaller, or if it's, kind of stands by itself, then this also shows that you hold yourself to a very high standard, and you may box yourself into these rules that you put upon yourself. If Saturn is not as big as the rest of the mounts in your hand, then it may show someone that doesn't put as much emphasis on rules. This is a more free individual. And if it is exaggerated, say the Saturn mount in your hand is exaggerated, and I will tell you, I think that it's rare to see that, although I have, that means that you feel like you know what's best for those around you too. And you might imply that with your body language. Everything is saying that, you believe that you are right, and you believe that you know what's best for the people around you, which might make you look rigid to other people. And on the lower vibratory end of that, you may struggle with depression. And again, I am speaking of a larger Saturn mount. You could struggle with seeing yourself as a victim, like the world has done you a major injustice. And on the lower vibratory end of it, being on the smaller side, you might find yourself as someone that isn't willing to self-analyze or to do the work on themselves because it may not be as important to you. So there you go. You'll have to, again, this is something that we want to keep track of in our notebooks, especially if it is one of the larger mounts or one of the exceptionally smaller mounts. It will indicate, again, the layering of your personality. And then when we get to the lines, it will either add to or take away the qualities or the characteristics of this mount. And hi, what you're looking at here is the Mount of Apollo, and it is below our ring finger. So Apollo is the Greco-Roman sun god, and he represents our love for beauty and art, our artistic inclinations, our happiness, and our potential for success. So here you will find your optimism, your vitality, and your creative potential. The Mount of Apollo has also been called the Mount of Brilliancy or the Mount of the Sun. So the larger the mount or the more in balance it is to your hand is a person that will be outgoing, enthusiastic, talented, creative, lively, positive, generally a happy person. And if Apollo is exaggerated, well, then this person might come off as loud or very intense. Maybe somebody that likes to burn the candle at both ends. And if it is hard to find your Mount of Apollo, then you might be considered insensitive, maybe dull compared to your peers, or they might see you that way. It's because you might be a little bit secretive, and you're not really comfortable around other people. So my Apollo actually veers towards Mercury. And you will notice that if your Apollo might actually veer towards one of the other mounts, like we discussed with Saturn. So if your Apollo is more on the Saturn side, you'll be creative, but in a less flamboyant way. So you might like more self-help or romantic knowledge, books. but your creativity is still going to be of great importance to you. And this again is if your Apollo is on the larger end. If your Apollo, like mine, veers towards Mercury, then material success is could be achieved through your artistic skills. And because you have such an intense love for art, and the art isn't just in, art takes on many forms. So remember these things as we move on, because again, when we get into chiromancy, the lines that we find on Apollo will either take away or add to the qualities or the characteristics that you find on the Mount of Apollo. So again, thank you so much for spending this time with me, and I hope you have a blessed day.